Today we'll be looking at the Pryme project work. We will go through the process of setting this up by defining work processes, templates, etc. Then we'll look at the different tranches of work performed by different people in the company. There are some processes that are more related to the project manager. That would be creating the work item, assigning the work, and monitoring the progress. And then, of course, for the performer of the work, e.g. the consultant, they would pick up the work, they would do the work and capture time on it and complete the work as they go. And of course, whatever time they track is also the basis for an invoice, potentially to the customer, or is it just internal cost that we will not really focus on today. But starting out with the first step, defining the work processes. This is a one-time setup, but we need to have that in order to create our work and put it into the right buckets, so to speak. So in my system here, I have some setup. And let's start with the setup part of it. The base setup for project work starts with defining a number series for work items. There are some settings for what we consider to be soon. It is more of a time period setting. So we say that soon is 7 days. You can change that. And there will be some settings for email notifications. We'll get back to those later on. Right now, we want to set up some processes and we want to define those. So work processes are used to define different kinds of work that go through different stages. And I have defined 4 different work processes here. One for consulting work, one for maintenance work, for marketing, and one for software development. And we can see they have a different number of stages in here. I could open up the consulting work process, and I can see that in this process, we have 4 stages. Things start off in backlog, then it moves to analysis, going to in progress, and then it's marked as being done. And these are freely definable. You can define any stage you want to have. You just define it in here, and then it becomes part of that process. But processes should be relatively fixed. You shouldn't be changing around the processes too much over time. It's good to have a fixed process. And if you introduce a new process, you might considering setting that up as a new version of that process, as making changes could change the history of things. We also see here on the process card that there's a relation between the stage and the progress. If something is marked as in backlog, we consider that to be not started. Then we have multiple stages, analysis and in progress, that we say this is when it's actually in progress. And when it moves to done, it is completed. So this is more of a high-level tracking of, is it started, is it completed, or is it being worked on? Just to take another example, let's have a look at the software development process, where we now have 8 different stages. And here we can see we go through backlog, analysis, design, development, testing, review, released, and done. And these are not necessarily the same stages. Some of them might be the same stages as other processes, but they could also be unique. And we see we even have 2 stages that could be marked as being complete. So this is not so much for tracking the work. It's first we mark it as released and then we mark it as done, but they are both considered that we are complete. So there are different ways of completing a software development process. That was a bit of setup. Let's get into actually tracking some work. And by tracking work, I mean we need to create some work items. Creating the work items can be done in multiple ways. I can create them on a project. So I could open up one of my projects in here. Let's take this one as an example. And in this very simple project, I have a set of new columns on my tasks. In this case, not started work items. And let's create some new work items that are not yet started. I go in, I select new, and then I can create my work item. But instead of just creating a work item from blank, I might have some idea of this is a kind of work that I have done before. So I will use a template. I will take, in this case, the marketing campaign template and apply it. And then it fills in a lot of the fields. It fills in the description. It also fills in a standard for recurrence on this. We'll get back to that in a second. But most importantly, it fills in the checklist. These are the things that should be done in a marketing campaign. All these 8 steps. And as the work is progressing, these are being marked as completed, and we can track the progress. That's part of the idea of having a work item. The user can also make notes on the side to this work item as work is performed, if that is needed. Now, I could set a start date on this, and let's start this campaign on January 1st. And we can also set a duration or due date and say, well, in this case, it should be done in, let's say, 3 days. That is the due date. So we set that as well. And in this case, we have a recurrence pattern already defined. So I can just select calculate recurrences, and it will create this as a recurring work item. Now, not all work items are recurring, but it could be something that is a recurring work item. I'll create work items, and we can see in this case, my setup on this template was that this would be monthly. It even says so. And we can see here that it has created for January, February, March, April, May, June, etc., etc. And so these are ready to be used. Now, I can, of course, assign this to someone as well. Let's assign this to Marty. And now this is something to do. This is marked as being in backlog. We haven't started working on it, but as soon as I start working on it, I can select what stage I'm moving this into. I can do it from the work item, and we'll later see I can also do that in other places. But let's say I move this into analysis, for instance. So this is how I can work with a work item. And now we have 12 work items that are not started on this project. I could also create them directly without going to the project. And for that, we need to open up the list of work items. These are the work items I currently have in my company. Now, this might be a bit of a list. Of course, I can set a filter on it. I could filter this in different ways, by category or by user. Maybe I want to set a filter on the category code. Let's say that we only want those that are marketing related, and these are all the ones I have. And then from here, I can open up a Kanban board to show all the different things we have. We can see here that Marty has this marketing campaign assigned. It's currently analysis. And then we have the ones that we created as recurrences for January and February. They are sitting here in unassigned, but I could assign them to myself. So I could assign myself the January one, let's say that one. And now that is sitting here in my backlog of things to do. I could also view this in a timeline. Here we are placing this by stage. So I'm seeing the backlog, analysis, design, approval, marketing, and done steps. But if I switch over to another set of columns, I could do this by just a rough progress where we don't have that drill down specific stage. I could also view this by due date. So we can see what do we have that is overdue, what do we have that is due this week, next week, and due later. So we kind of get a timeline of things. I can also change around the swim lanes and group this by project or customer or whatever I want. But looking at the timeline, I can do better than this. I can open this up as a calendar, and then suddenly we get a timeline view where we can see when things are planned to be done. This is the campaign for June, and this is in June. And if I go back to May, I probably will see that this is where the campaign for May is, and so on and so forth. So it's placing itself into the right timeline. Let's have a look at an example where we have some more work items. So I can now see in my role center that I have something more to do, my work items. I have this one, which is overdue to start. So this is marked as red. So I can easily see this. This is a marketing campaign for January, and we are way past January. So of course, I'm very late on this, but I'm immediately getting notified that I have something that is overdue. And the notifications are something that I mentioned before. If we go back into project work setup, we can have a look at how we can schedule email notifications. So we can schedule email notifications from in here. That will create a job queue that will run on a recurrence, and that will send out notifications to the users. In this case, it will send out notifications when you have a work item that is overdue and you haven't marked it as being either started or done. So now that I have something that is overdue, I will get a notification on email about that. If we look at the bigger picture, we have now created some work items. We have assigned the work. I assigned some of this to myself, and we can then finally have someone pick up that work. And this is where we get back into this, where I have picked up some of this work. It is now on my list of things to do, and I can start working with it. So next step is to capture and work with the time for me and for my project manager to monitor the progress. If I have this to do, let's say I have this one that is overdue, I can see this is a marketing campaign in here. I have not started it, and maybe I am at this point starting this. So I'm saying I'm now going into the analysis phase. I can also go in and say, yes, what have I done? I have defined the objectives and I have defined my target audience. This is as far as I get at this point. And my manager can see how far I am. When he looks at this, he can see that I have completed 2 of these steps and follow up on that. Now, some of these steps I might want to delegate to someone else. And I can do that by saying, I need someone else to approve this budget. Let's take this one and create a new work item out of this. And so we have a budget approval work item, which I could then assign to, in this case, Lena. And she will do the approval. When do I need this to be done? Well, this should be done no later than Thursday. And now she has something to do. As soon as I assign her this one, there will be an email notification to her saying, you have been assigned this piece of work. And then she knows that she needs to do this. And of course, it also shows up in her role center. And let me actually complete that piece of work on her behalf. I will move this into being done. This is now marked as completed. And I will see on my work item that this has been marked as done by Lena. I cannot myself change that. That is Lena's work. Well, I could change it, but that was because I was acting on behalf of Lena. So I can track the progress both of my own work, but also delegated work on these work items. Let's have a look at the bigger picture. We looked at one project or one user and the work assigned. If I open up the global list of all we have done and say we would like to see all the work, not just one category, I could open up the Kanban for everything in here. And now suddenly we see each of our resources in the system. We can see Ada. What does she have to do? She has these things to do. And some of that is due this week. Some of it is due next week. I can move things around. I could say, well, looks like there's a lot of work next week. Maybe we can move out this login issue to later, and I'll just drag it over here. And suddenly the dates change because now it's moved out into the future. And so I can rearrange work and I can view how far we are. Again, I could also reassign. I could say this overdue thing that is not really going anywhere, I would like to reassign that to Lena, but it's not fair to say it's still overdue. Maybe we could say, can you do this by tomorrow? So I'll put it in and set it due as tomorrow. I can always from here open this up and change the details, of course, but most of the time I will just be dragging things around. And looking in here, I can again look at different views. I could see this by individual, but I could also see it by customer and seeing this is all the work we have for Datum Corporation, or this is the work per project where we can see that we have different projects. There's also something here on the software application development project and something on the release campaigns project. And again, I can switch the columns around so we can see this by stage. And now we see we have a lot more stages. And that's because we're mixing different kinds of work. And some of the stages, they overlap, but some of these stages, they are unique to each of these pieces of work. So again, if we switch this around to who this is assigned to, we can see that some of these are in different stages, but not all of them can be moved to all kind of stages. If I try to take this marketing campaign, for instance, and move it into a stage, it's not always possible to move it to every possible stage, because a marketing campaign can only be in certain stages. It doesn't make sense to move a marketing campaign into testing, for instance, because there is no testing for a marketing campaign. So there's some limitations on that as well. So this is the basics of the work items. Now, if I create a work item and I would like to use that one again for something else, let's say I have this work item and I would like to create this as template for future work, I can always go in and say, save as template. And it will copy the checklist, it will copy the description, it will copy everything. I might want to put a category code in as well, because this is development. And so now I have a new template for user authentication implementation. And I can use that again on a new work item where I can select from my templates. I can also do sub-templates. I could say, well, I don't want to create a specific template for the entire work item. I would just like to save the checklist as a template. And so I can save the checklist as a template with those steps, and I can reuse that again. So now I have a checklist template. So these are the basic steps. These are the ways to work with project work. You define your process, you create your work items, you assign it to someone, they pick up the work, they monitor the progress, and they capture the time. And that's probably the only thing we haven't looked at. Now, the capture of time itself is not part of the project work, but this is one of the cases where one of our apps, in this case, Project Work, works better together with another app. So if you also have Pryme Time, you will see that they add to each other. So in Pryme Time, you can, of course, track your time with a start-stop timer or just creating time tracking entries. And if I start a timer here, I would normally be needed to fill in my project and task. But because I have work items, I can just select and say, yes, I was working on the software application development, and now I'm tracking my time on that. I don't need to know about the project and task because that is inherent to that work item. And this is where the work items become particularly strong. I have in this flow created work items manually for the different projects. But there could be an integration that creates work items from another system. That could be development system, a DevOps, a Jira, GitHub, something else, where you push in the work items. It could also be a support tracking system, a Zendesk, a Freshdesk, some kind of help desk system where you create work items and you push them in here. And by doing it that way, you get a clear reference of what you're tracking the time on to where it goes as well. Because each of these work items have a project and task related to them, you know exactly where to track that time. And for that scenario, we actually created as external reference field where you can fill in a link to the system it's coming from, and that will create a hyperlink so you can always go back to that help desk system or DevOps system and track the work there. We have tried to, as much as possible, follow some of the same methods and naming and structure as many of these external systems provide. So trying to make it easier to integrate with as well.